community and/or offer technical assistance in using their cell phones. She is available Thursdays through April. Should you wish to schedule a time with her, she is there in the back for you to meet and schedule. Where is she? There she is. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Mike. And I think this is a great, wonderful story that you're going to hear about.
If you're coming in, there are a couple chairs over here.
Wow.
Right in front of the piano. So this is our first forum of this year, and for those of you that don't know, our Forest Commons, which was started 10 years ago, each year does a series of forums, and this is the first one for this year, and we're very excited to have Hal and David here. Your lifelong friendship is an amazing, amazing story. So, let's see here. Has anybody moved into the neighborhood in the past year that wants to introduce themselves? Any newcomers? Okay, there you go, Susan. I know there are some. So, okay, and first of all, on our forums, all the Forest Park neighbors are welcome to attend, as well as neighbors, and we have a lot of other people not in the neighborhood here tonight, which is great because we want everybody to be a part of this. I'll start off and introduce our two guests. David Mao is a successful restaurant owner who has run and managed at least 6 Raleigh restaurants over many decades. Hal Hopfenberg is an NC State professor emeritus of chemical and biomolecular engineering. If you read his resume that I sent out, it is stunning how smart this guy is. And I'll point out, these two are going to tell you about their shared love of food and mathematics. So with that, I'm going to introduce David and Hal.
I'm Hal.
David.
Here, you hold the mic. Can y'all hear me without the mic? No, okay. Hal and I are going to share. David's already wired up on his own. So, okay. So I just introduced them. You know some of their credentials. And what I would have to point out is while these two professions seem very far apart, their friendship was formed on the other side of the world from a shared interest. So David and Hal, you two met in 1966 during the Vietnam War. Where and how did you meet?
David at the time was 21. David was 21. I was 27. I was protecting our nation against an invasion of communists, and I was successful. The war. It was in the middle of the Vietnam War, and David.
Even closer.
Okay. I was stationed basically in Saigon, and a contiguous town is a little Chinatown called Cholon, and David was at age 21 working in the kitchen in Cholon. I learned about this restaurant through some friends of mine that were actually with ABC News. They invited me to be their guest at a restaurant one night in Cholon in the Chinese area. And David's restaurant was just a very hip place. It was the hip place. The food was wonderful. And turns out as a coincidence, my bachelor officer's quarters, the BOQ, was actually in Cholon also. So I lived walking distance from the restaurant. So after being introduced to the restaurant, introduced to David, this became my go-to place if I ever had a chance to go to a restaurant. And David and I started a friendship. David wanted to learn algebra, and I wanted to learn cooking. And I learned cooking. I'll say at the time, David could actually factor a fourth order polynomial and multiply it back to see if he was right or not. I couldn't do that now, but he could do that then. In any event,
You got to put it really close. It feels unnatural.
okay.
The trick is to point your nose at it.
Okay. Thank you, Susan. The food he did there was just magnificent, and I guess during the course of this conversation, I'll talk about the limited facilities he had to produce that wonderful food. I'll just say in the beginning, if you ever been in England in a house, they'll have a little refrigerator under the counter, and that's it for the house. That was it for the restaurant. If David had an order of half-fried dumplings, he would start with a piece of pork and chop it with his cleaver, and everything was started from scratch. The thing that I recall, I'll never forget, is beer was a very important thing to have with that food. And David knew that beer was a pretty good profit item. So on the table were wonderful salted peanuts. And by the time it was over, he would actually have the table next to our dining table, which would be for the empty beer bottles. And we wouldn't stop until the table was completely covered with beer bottles, vertically. But this was the start of an extraordinary friendship, a friendship that actually was probably born in his kitchen, and has continued. Well, we're both octogenarians now, and we started in our 20s, so it's been a long and wonderful run.
David, your family restaurant was called the Eskimo, yet you served Chinese food. Okay, why was it called the Eskimo?
Because the Eskimo used to be an ice cream parlor. See, so my brother, my older brother, and transformed that into a restaurant. So we still keep the name Eskimo. So for that.
So your brother bought this restaurant from somebody? Is that how it came into the family? The Eskimo, did your older brother buy it from somebody?
Yeah, my older brother owned
Yes.
the restaurant, so
Right.
I just working for him.
Okay.
Yeah.
And your older brother was in the import-export business in North Vietnam?
Yeah, that was before 1955. You know, during the French colony. You know, Vietnam was French colony, and my brother was migrate from Hanoi to Saigon in 1955 when they separate Vietnam into two parts, north and south, and my brother decided to move south, you know, stay away with the communists. so when he get into Saigon, so he had to start from start from scratch, you know, again. So he opened up the ice cream parlor. It's not import export anymore. So that's why.
And everybody here doing okay with this mic? Okay. Okay. So you just moved it? Okay. David's brother was in the import-export business in North Vietnam. The French lost their war, of course, and the family relocated to Saigon. So in the import-export business, David's brother helped supply the French army with some of their stuff. So business conditions were probably better when we moved south.
Yeah.
So the Eskimo pie was one of the things they supplied with.
No. Yeah, just a different business in North Vietnam, and your older brother must have been a bit of an entrepreneur, I can imagine.
He's doing business, you know, in Hanoi, North Vietnam. See? And he support the French army for the food, you know, like wine, cheese, you know, all that stuff, coffee, you know, for the French troop because the French troop do not bring the food with them, see, so they buy from locally. So that's why my brother, doing like imported the wine from Algeria, French, to Hanoi, then recycled from the 50 gallon drum, into the bottle and sell it back to the French. So make a living out of that.
He sounds like a very good entrepreneur, just like you
Yeah.
have been.
Mhm.
So that's amazing. So where were you born? Where were you born?
Hanoi.
In Hanoi.
Mhm.
Okay, and
Yeah.
your parents, did they
Yeah.
immigrate to Vietnam from China?
Yeah, yeah, from China, from Fujian province.
And how many children were in your family?
Oh, we have a lot, about 13 of them.
Okay, all right. And how about you? Where were you born?
I was born in Hell's Kitchen. I was born in Hell's Kitchen, New York City, but I'm not urban. My folks moved out of New York City before I was 2, and my background really is suburban and rural. They also had a place. My father basically was a bass fisherman. That's what he cared about. So basically, my life is very different than being a New Yorker.
Okay, so Hal, I was asking you this before the meeting got started. When you met David, you were an MIT doctoral graduate and a young Army captain in Saigon. And I was asking you, did the Army send you there because of your knowledge and skill set to accomplish a mission?
Ultimately, I met I was at the Natick Laboratories doing research my first year in the service, and I met a general who came through, and when he found my background, he was on his way to Vietnam to head the Joint Research and Test Activity, and he asked for me to join him, and I said, yes, sir. So there was nothing else to say but yes, sir. His name was General Cowan, and he introduced me to the group I was in, and I think the group was backward. They had it was called Active, and I think once they got the acronym, they had to fill in the words, and the words were the Army Concept Team in Vietnam, and its acronym was Active, and its job was to really deal with technical issues that could help the troops with more novel equipment that would exist at the time.
Oh, I asked David how many siblings. How many, you have brothers and sisters?
Brothers and sisters, I have none.
Okay, all right. David, you were the youngest in your family, but you had a baby sister who died in childbirth, right?
Yeah, yeah. I have one young sister. Yeah.
Right, and so where I'm going with this is, I want to ask you where you learned to cook. How did you learn to cook?
At when my brother had the Eskimo, the ice cream barn converted into a restaurant, I learned it from there. And he hired the Chinese chef from mainland China when they was fighting in mainland China, and the chef was cooking in the army, for the Chinese army, and they are not returned back to China. They stay in Vietnam. So then my brother hired them to cook, to do the chef, and then I learned it from them. I learned from the chef.
Didn't you also learn from your aunt?
Yeah,
Your mother
also
also
aunt
died.
too. Yeah,
And so
my
I
aunt is.
your aunt
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
early on, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
How, after you came back from Vietnam, you spent 6 years getting David over here. You want to describe how that went, how hard it was, if it was difficult, and what the process is?
Well, obviously, I was ignorant. I had no idea about immigration issues. I left Vietnam in December of 1966, And the last conversation I had with David was, it would be great if you can get me out. And I'd established a sufficiently warm relationship with David that it became a mission on my part to see if I could do this. Trying to make the right contacts, and everything fell through. It's a wonderful story. I guess it was 1972. I was at a cocktail party, which is my usual want to be at a cocktail party. And I met a gentleman who had a connection with a man named Ben Gim. And Ben Gim at the time was the organizer for Chinatown in New York for Robert Kennedy, who was running for Senate. So he had contacts at the highest level, and it was through Ben Gim that we were able to get the visas to get David over here. And that was 1972, but I left in 66. That was a long 6 years for David. In between that was the Tet Offensive, which hit Cholon very badly. So the family was, when I met David, he was in Cholon in 66, 67. By 68, it was over because the Tet Offensive was a brutal attack on Cholon. And I think David then ended up working at PX.
Yeah, yeah. Working in the in 1968, and I worked for the U.S. Post Office, Post Exchange, the PX, and for till 72 before I come over. See, because at that time, I think it's about time to move. because we at that time we just withdraw our troop from 500,000 to 250,000. I think I don't want to run away from the communist again to the South China Sea. See, so I think I go ahead. I think if we will lead the war to the Vietnamese government, I mean, there's no way to fight against the Viet Cong. So I think I time to leave the country. And then I contact Hal. So Hal just sponsored me over.
And when you came over here, you lived with Hal for a number of years, right?
Yeah.
And then you went back to Vietnam to get your wife in 72?
Yeah, end of 72, when I had my residency, called a green card. And then I went back to Cholon, to Saigon, and to get my fiancée out. So in 1970, maybe first part in 73, 1973.
And then ultimately, you bought a house next door to Al and Betsy
Yeah.
on West Park Drive.
Yeah, yeah.
And what year did you buy that house?
At that time, in 1980, the house was up for sale, and Hal called me, this is a house, good house, So I said, yes, okay. And then I just bought a house next to him, his house. So we stayed in the neighbor for maybe 30 years. Till,
40?
Yeah.
40 years?
Yeah, 80 to 2000, yeah, 40 years about.
Okay, so with your guys' love of food, both of you have been in the restaurant business. Of course, David, you spent most of your life in it, very long hours. I did not know until we got to talking to you guys that Hal also got involved in restaurants.
Yeah.
And you owned and operated 6 restaurants in Raleigh, starting with Mandarin House. What were your other restaurants that you owned and operated?
I have the Mandarin House, it's the first one. Then later on, I got, and I sponsored some of my family, my in-law, like my parent-in-law come in and their children. And then I opened up another one in downtown Raleigh, the Fairview Street. At that time, still called Fairview Street, not Fair. So Hal give me a course, the Great Mall of China, on Fairview Street.
Well, let me say a couple of things about the naming of David's restaurants. I always had the idea that you should have a restaurant called the Duck and Dumpling. And when David started his restaurant in 1976, and I'll say Smedes is here, without Smedes and his dad, we would not have had that restaurant. They were very critically important to make that happen. And thank you for that again. But David has always been smarter than me. And here's a key example. My idea was to name it the Duck and Dumpling. And David in 1976 knew that was too hip. It was not right for Raleigh at the time. The menu was not right for Raleigh at the time. And he named it the Mandarin House. I named all the other restaurants because Raleigh was ready for the hipness. And what David's talking about was the Fayetteville Street Mall. And it's a joke. I said, why don't you call it the Great Mall of China? He did, and it worked. He also did name the other restaurant the Duck and Dumpling, thankfully. And then he extended that and had David's Dumpling and Noodle Bar. Also had one that was obvious to name. I looked at the restaurant and he had it decorated with abacus all over the wall. I said, that's the name, the abacus. That restaurant is now Cafe Luna at the corner of Hargett Street and Blunt. So there's one more, the China Cafe and Grill.
Oh, yeah.
Up in Mini City. I think that's 6.
Well,
But David's genius was not to listen to me and to name it the Mandarin House in the first place.
And so while Hal's doing all this advanced stuff over in NC State that I understand, he was also working, dabbling in the restaurant business with Seth Jones and that was actually 68. No, I'm sorry, I got it reversed. Frog and Nightgown was 68, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And if you look at some of the emails that went out, the Frog and Nightgown had an audience that was mixed race, and which at the time was kind of a little unusual for Raleigh. So I found online some articles talking about how the Frog and Nightgown was ahead of its time. Likewise, I think you created a menu that was pretty sophisticated for Raleigh standards, wasn't it? Or was that Seth Jones, or both?
Well, looking back at it, I would say neither. But I think that the people it was right for the time. Let me say this: the Frog and Nightgown was started by Peter and Robin Ingram, and they started as a jazz pub. Peter was an extraordinary impresario, and he brought in the best jazz acts in the country. In addition to jazz acts, he brought in comedians. Here's a few comedians he brought in: George Carlin, Lily Tomlin, Bette Midler. These were young comedians in 1968. The jazz acts were extraordinary. George Shearing, Charlie Bird, Dizzy Gillespie, James Moody, everyone, Thelonious Monk, unbelievable. But to get these people had to pay a pretty big cover charge. And the thing just didn't fit. People were paying $8 a head for a 1-hour cover charge and then eating fish and chips. It didn't fit. So the idea was, Peter was, by the way, I met Peter, we have a common mentor. A professor named Vivian Stanet was his boss at the Research Triangle Institute, called the Camille Dreyfus Laboratory. And while I was in Vietnam, I had known Vivian, and while I was in Vietnam, he moved from the Research Triangle to take a position as a distinguished professor at NC State. He was Peter's boss at the Research Triangle. So he, as both of our mentors, introduced us to each other. We were the same age, we were both born in 1938. And Peter was a very, very good scientist, but even a better impresario. And what he did with the Frog and Nightgown is simply unbelievable. Ultimately, when I was involved with it, it was on Medlin Drive, where Crowley's was later. And ultimately, he ended up with the Yorks in the Underground, which is a very novel, ahead of his time operation in the early 70s. I guess, what, 1970 Smedes? Yeah. So,
70 to 86.
wow.
Subway was there, but he wasn't there.
Yeah. Well, my conversation with Peter is, I think that the menu should sort of match the jazz, and it should be upgraded a bit. And it turns out we were too successful, that I was making more money on the food than he was on the jazz, so that had to come to an end. He was taking all the risk, I was taking all the money. That didn't work.
And what about Seth Jones, which came later? want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, a very, very close friend of mine, who's now a very close friend, Bill Hedrick, who was a young 92. And Bill was a family practitioner in Raleigh. At the time, I think he owned 9 pieces of real estate and 11 vehicles. Uh, he had no limit to his interest in things. And he was stationed in Orleans in France when he was in the service. And he had this romantic vision of bringing France to Raleigh. And he was going to open up a really high-level French restaurant in Raleigh called Seth Jones 1847, because the house he had the restaurant was going to be sited in a house that was built by Seth Jones in 1847. So that was the name of the restaurant. I was invited there the night before the first opening, and Bill came to me after the meal and said, "Hal, what do you think?" I said, "Bill, I can save you a lot of money." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Don't open." And you can imagine that would be the end of our friendship. It wasn't. It was the beginning. That was March of '73. In December of '73, he called me and says, "Hal, I don't want you to say I told you so, but you were right." I said, "What do you mean, Bill?" I hadn't spoken to him since. I met him that one day. He said, "Well, last night we outnumbered them." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "We had more staff than customers. And I want you to fix it." I said, "Well, first thing we do, Bill, is you close it down, change the name. I mean, all it's got is a bad rap all over the trial. Everyone tried it once. Let me tell you what he did. He was selling soup in 1973 for $4.50 a bowl. That's 2024 numbers. It was, so everyone that could afford it went once and never came back. So my idea was make it a price fixed menu, and we put in a price fixed menu at $9.50 for 5 courses, but we gave them a 6th course. It was pate on the table, and that was just an additional course, and it worked. And I was involved in that for 6 months. At the end of the 6 months, I was invited to go on a mini sabbatical at the Max Planck Institute for Biophysics in Frankfurt. And I said, "It's over. I'm going to stop fooling around with restaurants. I'm going to be a professor. I'm going to go to the Max Planck Institute." And I took my agreement with Bill, which was a buy-sell agreement, similar to one that I hadn't executed with the Frog. And I said, "Bill, you own the restaurant outright." And I ripped up the agreement. I said, "You own it." "Really? You own it, Bill. I'm going to go to Frankfurt." Well, years later, all those cars and all those houses were coming home to roost, and he was forced to sell his little love chateau he had in the mountains, a little 7.5-acre place in Vanderbilt, North Carolina, and said, "Do you want it?" And Patsy and I said, "We want it." And we owned it. So that was, I guess, 1980. And we've owned it ever since, including during Hurricane Helene. So the wonderful place that we have up there, our home made it fine, the barn made it fine, the cats made it fine, but the rest of the farm operation didn't. Helene was really a problem for us. But that all came because of the friendship that we started with Bill early on, and him offering me the place in 1980.
So with that restaurant and your disconnect from it, that you stopped your own restaurant stuff, but you've always been involved with David going forward.
As I recall, David had something to do with it, with Seth Jones.
Seth Jones, yeah.
David offered a special dinner that was called the Emperor's Delight. What did you call it? You had a special name for the meal. It was only for groups of people, like 8 or 10 people coming in.
Yeah, I think it's like a family dinner, something like that. Yeah.
And that was way back in 1974. Just
73, 74.
74, because I didn't start till 74.
Yeah.
So
Seth Jones.
that's the only time. I've never had any financial involvement with David at all, ever. So that's what kept our friendship together.
Going from restaurants for a minute, David, when you were in from Saigon, you were telling us when we got together back in December that there was prejudice against ethnic Chinese in Vietnam, and you were going to a school where they were telling you that you shouldn't learn in Chinese but in Vietnamese. Is that correct?
Yeah. Mhm. In I think in 62, 60, late 50 or 60, the Vietnamese government, they don't let the Chinese study Chinese school, no Chinese school, all Vietnamese, subject, Vietnamese language, everything in Vietnamese. And and I don't at that time I don't think I will stay in Vietnam the rest of my life. So why should I learn Vietnamese? So I just quit school, quit my school in grade school, like seventh grade, and then I quit school and going to learn English and also learn algebra. That's how I asked how to teach me algebra on the side. So
So when Al was teaching you algebra, were you also going to a regular school
yeah,
anywhere?
not regular school. I went to at that time we have in Vietnam have a VAA, it's Vietnamese American Association. They teach English over there. So I just go there and study like each week, just 3 hours. You know, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 1 hour a day. So I learn my English from there. So, so to learn my English. At that time, most advisor, at that time the advisor family, is
American,
teaching.
American
American
advisors?
advisor. American advisors family, the wife, is teaching over there. So I learned from there. And
In the promotions we set out for this event, there's a photograph of you with Glenn Ford visiting
yeah,
the Eskimo. And I heard that the Eskimo was very popular with a lot of Americans. What other
yeah,
famous Americans or correspondents came through the Eskimo?
yeah. Eskimo mostly training with the American civilian, like people who work at the embassy, like news reporter, like ABC, CBS, they all went there and for dinner.
I can name one because I remember very clearly. As I mentioned, my first introduction to the Eskimo was through the folks at ABC News, and they had young war correspondents who were there. There was an anchor, Peter Jennings. You probably know Peter Jennings, and Peter Jennings knew I was involved in this fancy thing called Active, so he immediately said, "Are you good at spelling?" I said, "I don't know. What do you mean?" He says, "How do you spell sacrilegious?" And I got it wrong. It's spelled with an I, not an E. So I think that's the famous person that was there. Um, I know that Howard K. Smith was there from ABC. Uh, it was typically the ABC crowd was instrumental in that.
How many tables or how many customers did the restaurant accommodate?
Oh, it's a tiny restaurant, maybe about 10 table,
Yep.
maybe about 40 seats, like that, tiny one. So
And how long did you have the family restaurant, the Eskimo, from
I
1 year
asked
to
him,
1 year?
yeah, I worked there till 68. I worked for my brother till 68.
And when did your brother buy the Eskimo? When did your brother buy the Eskimo?
Buying an Eskimo.
Yeah.
I think he started from 1970, no, 1956 or 57. That's when my family run away from the north, see, from Hanoi to Saigon. In and after 1 or 2 years, he started the Eskimo. So I worked there. Then
Okay, another change from restaurants. Hal, I found out from talking to you, and some people will remember this. I didn't know this. You were the athletic director briefly at NC State. You want to tell us about that?
There were two things in my life where my resume said you can't be successful. One was going to Vietnam, and the other was be an interim director of athletics. Uh, this was because of my close relationship with the former Chancellor Larry Monteith, who sort of had me do all the dirty work. So whatever difficult job there was in the university that didn't require a search committee, I would get that job. Uh, I I have to say that it was a pleasure. I love the people in the Department of Athletics. They're still my friends. It was a wonderful year, and I'm pleased I was able to be successful that year because my resume would have predicted quite the opposite.
And was that around the time of Albani?
Yeah, that was a transition.
Okay.
That's a whole other forum we can have one evening. I can tell you the whole basis of the Vietnam War and the whole basis of Jim's resignation, which was not a firing. It was an orchestrated resignation. As you can imagine, Jim did things that were in his interest, and he was very successful at everything he touched. And the most important thing he's touched, of course, is the Lee Foundation. And you have to say that the whole thing ended up as something very, very important. And it's amazing the kind of things he was accused of now are laughable with new athletic systems. It's just unbelievable.
Let's talk about a recipe. On this presentation that's been going behind us, there's a meat pie on here, and I don't know if we can scroll to it right now or not, but it'll come back up. You want to give it a shot? Let's see if we can get the meat pie up. Okay, but while they're talking about it, I want to tell you the story about that meat pie.
Okay. I think it's the best thing that David's ever cooked. And it was a specialty at the Eskimo. And it was cut into sections like that. But let me tell you what that is. Those are two pieces of dough, like a normal pastry dough, very thin, and you'd place them on a plate, and the plate would have to be covered with cornstarch so it wouldn't stick to the plate. Now inside this was meat, and the meat was pork, but the pork was quick stirred first. So first of all, it had to be marinated in some soy, a little bit of oyster sauce, maybe a little bit of sesame, black pepper, a little bit of cornstarch, and then quick stirred, put off to the side. And then also there would be regular leeks, like you would find in French cooking, leeks. And then there'd be wood ears, also called fungus. There'd also be banana flowers, tiger lily buds. And then there'd be egg beaten with some soy sauce, and you'd make this into something that can be placed into this plate, but you can't keep it there too long. If you keep it there too long, it'll go through the pastry, so it has to be pretty quick. Then you take the second piece of pastry, put it over the top, making sure it's pinched well all around the edges, and you take this thing, which is very, very wobbly, and you dump it into cooking oil. Let me say that. One thing about cooking oil before we finish this. Cooking oil, David called at the Eskimo pig oil, a term that I had never heard because in the Eskimo at those temperatures, lard was a liquid. So what we would call it was really lard, but it was in the form of a low viscosity liquid. And it was deep fried in this after it's been pinched around. So that's been fried and then turned, so both sides, and then cut. I view that as pretty complicated stuff, and I'm very proud that I was able to make it.
David, are you proud of your stew?
Can you look at the picture, the pie coming up?
Yeah, I can't do. If you want to see really an art at work, is David making dumplings. It is just unbelievable to see those hands move and the product that comes out. I could work for 20 minutes to make one dumpling, and it would not like what he makes in 10 seconds. It's just absolutely beautiful and beautiful tasting. He's a wonderful chef, and that is the peak of chefing right up there.
So if you had a dumpling restaurant, the dumplings would cost a lot more money based on your output,
Mhm.
or you would just go broke?
I am basically a money repellent man. And those of you who know me can understand that I don't do well with investing. It would not do well. I like his dumplings.
So,
David, let's see,
yeah.
something else about your growing up years.
Yeah.
Your older brother, was he the main, I don't know how to put this, your dad, the photo of you guys pulling forward shows your dad there with your older brother, I think, right? That was your dad in the photograph? And so I'm just wondering, did your older brother kind of take charge of the family in terms of making things
Yeah,
happen?
yeah. My older brother that's like in charge, the family, taking over.
Okay.
So
And I think you told me this, your family members, quite a few of them came to the United States, and you still have some siblings around?
mm, no, most everybody here.
Most everybody?
Yeah,
Okay.
most everybody here. Oh, and by the way, when I first had my first restaurant at Cameron Bridge, Mansion House, and Mr. Willie York, helped me to set up, to establish, the restaurant. And at that time, with the financing was bad, and Willie told me to get the SBA loan,
Small
and then
business?
then I fill up all the paperwork for the SBA loan and submit it, and then I get a loan, you know, very quickly, like maybe a month or so or two, then that's why, and I established the first one, first mansion house. And after that, and I pay off the loan pretty quickly, So the SBA loan asked me, do you need any more money? I said, no, I have enough right now. That's why. Yeah. So really, helped me to establish, the mansion now. Otherwise, there's no financing, like, so yeah.
Does anybody have any questions for them? I see a hand up already.
Letters. It was only letters. No iPhones. Yeah, that's right.
At that time, what was phone service like between our countries? Was it pretty? Because I remember when my dad was in Vietnam the first time, it was really hard to get a phone call through. It was very a special occasion when you got a phone call. Were you able to talk back and forth?
No,
No.
I don't recall ever making a phone call from Vietnam. No.
And and with you trying to work to get David over here, was your correspondence and dialogue all done through the mail?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
All your communication in English, or did you learn Vietnamese, or David speak French, or other?
What you're hearing this evening is where we spoke then. Nothing has changed.
Another question?
Just a comment, we miss your spring games at the Mandarin House. We used to order those routinely, back in, I suppose, the early 80s, early 70s.
Well, David was there 25 years.
I have a question for David. How did his family survive during this time? Such
Did all your family survive during the war? Was
Yeah.
anyone killed during the war?
Yeah,
Anyone hurt?
no.
Remember, there was another war before the American War. There was the French colonial war where they lost in Dien Bien Phu in 1954. So, and that's the business was selling to the French. That was the French army. So the major war there before ours was the French Indo-Chinese War, which led to what was called a plebiscite in '56, which led to the division into this artificial North and South Vietnam. You can probably hear through the lines. I didn't have a great deal of support for that war.
We got some more questions. Susan?
I'm grateful, David, your years in the neighborhood. I didn't listen carefully. What year did you buy your house on Park Drive?
What year did you buy the house? 1980.
No, 1980.
Went to school with other lads here. I'm trying to remember. So what year did you move to Park Drive?
Buy the house,
Buy the house?
1980.
80?
Yeah, 1980.
David? Then David, you already had David.
Ni-
1980?
Yeah,
Yes.
you did, didn't you?
Yes. Yes. I was born in 78.
78?
Yeah. I was born in 78.
78, yes.
Yeah, already had the house.
And I don't know how many brothers and sisters you have.
I'm the only one.
You're the only one. I have one son who's in David's family. Couple of kids here. David's face off.
Ron?
There was a picture of the two of you and this entertainer, Freddie.
Oh, that was my T-shirt.
Hey, Ron, there's nothing special about that. That's just one of the photos they sent me. And every time we talked about it, he always mentioned Freddie Mercury. So I just felt like the slide had to have a reference to Freddie Mercury. There you go. There you go.
Yeah, I came to Freddie Mercury late, but I'm a very, very dedicated fan now.
Yeah, he had an awesome voice.
And the Queen was an amazing group.
Belinda?
So you live next door to each other? You go to each other's houses for dinner?
Oh yeah,
Who did who cooked?
his aunt,
Even better.
much better, even better than him. She was amazing. Yeah.
When Hal and David go out to a restaurant, which restaurants do you go to?
Okay. The new restaurants for the younger people. Most places, when Patsy and I go to a restaurant, I say, "Do you think there's anyone in here within 50 years of our age?" And the answer is probably no. I don't go to those places. They're too loud. I love the ethnic places that have grown up around Raleigh. I love, in particular, Bosphorus in Cary. I like what they've done with Neomond. I like, there's a couple of Mexican restaurants that are extremely good. That are just straightforward ethnic restaurants, Indian restaurants. So my interest in the restaurants here are more toward the ethnic restaurants, simple, ethnic, honest, straightforward restaurants with older people. David, ask you. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Aha. Well, I think that Bruy Vivana fits the mold I said. It's a wonderful restaurant for people under 40.
David, do you have any favorite restaurants you go to these days?
Not mostly, but I try out, from time to time, all the restaurants. See.
A group of us were at Lime and Lemon yesterday. I think it's pretty good.
Mhm.
Also, David's restaurant, the Duck and Dumpling, was in the spaces now Vitamanda.
Mhm.
And,
Yeah.
both Bruvabana and Vitamanda are just wonderful, wonderful restaurants. Just, I'd like to be able to speak to Patsy when I'm at dinner.
Very loud.
Very loud, yes.
I had complained to the owner about that.
That's Susan Woodson. Her son owns the restaurant.
Yeah.
Any other questions right now? We're not gonna end this, guys.
You ever consider writing a book about your relationship? It's so fascinating on a human level, and then the history of Raleigh, similar level. You ever consider doing that?
I have not. I have considered. Yeah. It's too late. I always thought I was going to write a cookbook, but the name of the cookbook was going to be "Come Fry with Me." That's fried meat pancake would be the top of the list.
Some of the best meals we had at David's house were made by his aunt, his old aunt, who came, in what year, David?
Yeah.
Auntie. What
Pan-
year did Auntie come?
Pancake.
What year did Auntie come to you?
Oh, and I think 80, 82, 80 some. I don't recall by about 82 or 83.
Auntie cooked.
Yeah.
When she came, I would look out the back window and she would be cooking over a little flame fire that she had made in the backyard. Although there were modern stoves in the house, she couldn't cook almost when she came. And so she started out cooking in the backyard on those tiny little fires. But the meal at David's house when Auntie cooked was about 2 hours long. And there was one course after another after another that she cooked. She never spoke English. We never were able to correspond with her other than through the food and being there at the table. But she was an exceptional person and cook. And we had many wonderful meals there with Auntie when she was living.
Let me say one more thing about Auntie. And this is just, I think, one of the most romantic things I've ever heard from anyone, including David. As David mentioned, David's the 13th in the family, the youngest. But there was a youngster that was born the next year and passed away. And David always said, if a mother brings you up, it's because she has to. If an aunt brings you up, it's because she wants to. I owe her more than I would owe my mother. And that's an amazing relationship. I'll never forget those lines.
Yeah.
So your aunt lived with you?
Mhm.
Your aunt was living with you?
My
Yes.
auntie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Answer.
Is Auntie the person, the woman we used to see working in the yard, walking around the
Yeah.
yard a lot? I saw her so many times. Your
She
daughter
always
looked
walking around the
wonderful.
neighborhood.
She'd walk with her hands behind her
Yeah.
back.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. With a hat on it.
Yeah, yeah. I have one more question too.
Yeah.
Whatever happened to the fur panda design rug that was in Mandarin House? I love that rug. I would steal it every time I came.
Yeah.
You still have it?
I got it when I closed down the Mandarin House. I took it with me, and I put it on my house, hang it on my house.
Good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's so soft,
Yeah.
whatever it's made
Yeah.
out of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would,
The panda. Yeah.
everybody
the
would just
panda.
feel it on the way
Yeah.
out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The panda rug.
Yes, loved it.
There's another thing that was left over from the Mandarin house. He had beautiful Howard Miller spheres that were the lighting on the ceiling.
Really?
And Patsy said to David, whatever you do, keep the spheres. But he didn't. And you know the restaurant called The Lantern in Chapel Hill?
Yeah.
That's where they are.
Wow.
Yeah.
They're so
Yeah.
popular.
They are.
Yeah.
This way.
Well, I know
Hey,
you guys forever. When I got married the first time, I had my wedding party at the Mandarin House at the back room. And the thing that people don't fully appreciate today is that there was no liquor by the drink. So the restaurant business changed dramatically once you could get a drink. And up to that point, like you talked about with the jazz place, they couldn't sell the drinks. They couldn't make enough money to pay the bands. And today, we just take it for granted that you can have a drink. You guys were so pioneered at a time when no one told you you had a chance. Reminds me of me.
And of course, this is the famous
Arthur Gordon.
And that's his lovely wife, Audie, sitting next to him. So, David and Arthur have a lot of war stories.
Yeah.
Over the years. A lot of them.
About 7 times.
So that's a question for David Jr. sitting here. Given what you saw your dad doing all the long hours, I'm surprised you didn't take on diligent restaurant business. Just a joke.
Actually,
He's too smart.
the thing was, I really miss my father growing up. Every morning, the working hours and the dedication he put into raising, funds and raising me and my family members. His hard work, obviously took a toll on me, but yet I'm so appreciative of his dedication to the restaurant business. And when my parents weren't around, these amazing people here offered had to would basically take care of me as basically as a baby. My father had to travel to different places to get equipment for the restaurant and that type of thing. I just missed the time, with my father. But yeah, I still had Andy, and I still had the basically family.
Yeah. You guys had a great setup. And it is really a sacrifice to run a restaurant. It really is. And those of us that dine here appreciate it. Any other questions or Victoria?
That's just a garnish of parsley. It's just a visual. It has no relationship to the pancake.
Yeah. But when Hal sent me that photograph and he was describing it, I thought he set this photo up because it looks lovely. The wooden surface looks nice. It's a little bit Southern magazine kind of thing. And I thought, did you set that up? And it's like, no, I just took a photo. No big deal.
Oh, that's called the actual. We grow that parsley, and it's called parsley giant of Italy. So it is a very large form. Yeah.
Are you growing that up in the mountains?
Yeah. Yeah. We have a pretty substantial garden in the mountains. It's probably about 120 feet square, so we can grow a lot of stuff in the mountains.
And you guys have had cattle up there too, right?
the operative word is had. In Hurricane Helene, we lost the fences. We lost 2,000 feet of fences and had to sell the cattle.
Wow. So you've been busy with a lot of stuff like that.
It'll be a year or two before we get back on our feet there.
Wow. Bob, my partner and I just returned from Vietnam and Laos, and so if any of you are looking for a destination to travel to, we can't recommend it highly enough. It's just an absolutely remarkable country. Previously, we've gone to South Vietnam and Cambodia, and this trip was a combination of North Vietnam and Laos, and both were exceptional. The food, if you're a foodie at all, you need to go to North Vietnam, and it's very, very reasonable. For example, going out at night to a perfectly fine restaurant would be in the $10 to $15 range for a really nice meal. So it's just a long way to get there, but it was well worth the travel. Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming with the inclement weather that we have out here and risking your falling on the ice. I was asked if we have to pick up the room when we leave, so if you put a chair over to the edge, that would be helpful, but don't feel like you have to.